Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
Wyoming native and New York Times best-selling author C.J. Box comes to the Laramie County Public Library and talks about his life as an author, Joe Pickett, of course, and his book, The Highway, which will launch as the series The Big Sky on ABC this fall. Our first question, did he drive to the library in a semi? Author C.J. Box, next on Wyoming Chronicle.
Funding for this program is made possible in part by the Wyoming Humanities Council, helping Wyoming take a closer look at life through the humanities, thinkwhy.org, and by the members of the Wyoming PBS Foundation. Thank you for your support.
And we're pleased to be joined on this Wyoming Chronicle with best-selling author C.J. Box and Wyoming native. C.J., welcome to Wyoming Chronicle.
Well, it's my pleasure. It's fun to do this. Very challenging, like everything is these days, but I'm looking forward to it.
We're really, really pleased that you're here, but I have to ask you, and we need to get this out of the way right at the start. You didn't drive a semi-truck here, did you?
No, I did not.
Thank goodness.
Yes, I drove my pickup, but I think you're referring to the book The Highway.
Yes.
About a serial killer truck driver. And in order to research that novel, I did hitch a ride with a pair of long-haul truckers and met them in Billings, went with them overnight, ended up in Chicago, and did a lot of research on being on the road like that to use in the book.
It's a creepy book, Chuck.
It's really creepy.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Is it one of the darker books that you have written?
I think the darkest. There's a couple other sequels that come that are equally kind of as dark. But that one in particular, and I think it's affecting, partially because some of the story in the book is told from the point of view of the trucker. And I think getting in his head. And I think that kind of creeps out a lot of readers.
I want to stay on that theme before we start to talk more about your career, because this has turned out really to be something special for you. In fact, it's been turned into a series that will appear on ABC this fall.
That's right.
Tell me a little more about that.
Well, yes, I'm going to sound like I'm doing a commercial. Tuesdays on ABC.
There we go.
November 17th, it's going to begin. It's not called The Highway, it's called Big Sky. And the executive producer is David E. Kelley, who's done a lot of TV shows, Big Little Lies, Boston Legal, I think 13 or 14 different shows. And he's been trying to get it on the air now for 4 years. Had a couple different networks, and then this one just fell together very quickly. And it's the only new drama on ABC this fall. They're shooting right now in Vancouver, and as far as I know, it's on schedule.
What's your role then, once one of your books, which is wildly successful, becomes a TV show and it kind of goes out of your hands?
Well, the way I look at it is I provided the source material. I'm not on the set every day. I'm not overlooking every script. I can't. I don't want to. I trust David E. Kelley. I did read the pilot script that he did a couple years ago, and it scared the crap out of me.
Scarier than your book.
Yeah, I knew
it
was going to happen, and it still was. So I know he does a great job, and because of if I went to Canada to the set, I'd have to quarantine for 14 days. So I'm not doing that. Neither is David E. Kelley, as a matter. So we'll be watching it when it comes out.
You're a Wyoming native.
That's right.
Where'd you grow up?
In Casper. Grew up in Casper on the east side of Casper.
Mustang or a Trojan?
Trojan. I was a Trojan. I grew up in sight of Kelly Walsh High School.
Okay.
And went there, and then went off to, I edited the high school newspaper, and we won some real big national awards. So I got journalism scholarship to the University of Denver.
You're a pioneer.
I'm a pioneer. And then from there, my first job was at the Saratoga Sun newspaper, which is where we now live again.
And what did you do there? Were you a reporter, a sports editor, a small town guy that just did it all?
Oh, for a small weekly, you do everything. Yeah, I mean, you cover you get the police blotter, you go out and take pictures of the 4-H prize cow. I went out and interviewed, survivalists in encampment and, saw all their guns and grenades. Got to do everything, but it was some of the best background and training for writing I think I could have ever had.
And after college, there had to be an itch to write a book somewhere along the way. Take us through that.
It took, I call it my 20-year overnight success story. When I was a reporter in Saratoga, Wyoming, that was really the first time I started thinking about maybe writing a novel someday. My interest or my background was journalism, so it was a little different kind of thing. But I started thinking then about a story about, and at the time, that time in Wyoming were when the black-footed ferrets were discovered, after been thought long extinct, possibly. And when they were discovered, I found it really fascinating when they were found around Meeteetse that so many residents knew they were there all the time, but nobody ever said anything. And I thought that was a fascinating kind of commentary on the New West. And I thought someday I want to write this story. But it took a lot of versions, a couple of manuscripts that no longer exist to get there, and basically 20 years from when I started to when I finally got that book published. That was open season in 2001. It was with Joe Pickett, the game warden, as the protagonist.
How long in that 20-year process did it take you to think of Joe Pickett?
Originally, the first protagonist, I think, was going to be a local sheriff, and then it was going to be a journalist, which is what I was. Mm-hmm. And then I was doing some ride-alongs for the newspaper with the local game warden, and I realized that's the perfect vehicle for this story, because a game warden is, they're very heavily armed, and they're usually alone in the field, and they would be involved in an endangered species type situation in their district. And I got to know more about how game wardens operated and what really a wide range of things that they did, and it was kind of just a perfect conduit. But it was never, I never thought this is the first book in a series. I never thought, the world is waiting for a Wyoming game warden series, and I'm the only guy who can deliver that. It just happened that way. And luckily the foundation set in that book still serves to this day. And it wasn't until Penguin Putnam, the publisher, said we would like 3 books with Joe Pickett that it was a series. Some authors I know are thinking 10 books into the series, this is what's going to happen. I was never that strategic.
He was in his 30s when you
Right.
started writing about him. He's no longer in his 30s.
No.
You both have aged together.
Yes, I'm a little older, yeah. But in fact, a couple of years ago, all of a sudden I realized I don't know how old Joe Pickett is. So I went back to the very first book, saw that he said he was 32, and then tracked my way through the series, whether they were a year from the last book, 4 months back to back, and realized at that point he was about to turn 50. So in the book I just finished, he's 51.
How long will Joe Pickett be a game warden? Do we know?
I don't know. At the rate it's going, Joe Pickett should retire about the time I'm ready to retire.
Have you thought about that?
No, I have not. I never think more than one book ahead, and it's not like it's real work. I mean, for me, it's
So
just
almost
I love
30
it.
books is not real work. I need to make a note of that.
Well, I mean,
sounds like an enormous
It's not like
task.
working construction
Sure.
or building a road.
Sure.
I go into an office. I try to do 1,000 words a day, which is basically 4 pages, and I'm pretty dedicated at doing it. And I love to write the first draft. It's my favorite thing. And but it's not like 8-hour, 9-hour, 10-hour job every day.
Sure. What's most important in a book? Is it the lead paragraph? Is it the cover art? Is it the title? What rings for readers, and what do you think has the most emphasis there?
It's all of those things, really. But I think it's really important, I still try to do this, is have the first page grab the reader, even the first paragraph, sometimes even the first line. Because I remember very early on, I think with the very first book, I was at a book signing in Hamilton, Montana, and a guy walked up, opened the book, my new book, first book, read the first line, closed the book, put it down, and walked out of the store. It was devastating.
Wow.
But then that didn't happen very often. So I always keep trying to do that. I know people have a lot of choices of books to read and other things to do. So I don't want to make any book ever seem like homework.
He was a guy who looked at your book.
Yes.
And we teased this a little bit earlier about who reads your books. I think you've told me that 80% of folks who buy novels are women. Mm-hmm. What does your research tell you about who your readers are?
It's about 50-50 men and women. And I used to tell my publishers that when I went out on the road, did book tours, that the audience was 50-50. And a lot of husbands and wives, sometimes dads and daughters. And they really didn't believe me because that mix didn't compute in the things they did. But they actually did a focus group a few years ago and found out it was in fact 50-50 men and women, all different ages.
That surprise you?
It did. Well, it didn't surprise me because I kept telling them that was the case. Mm-hmm. But they just assumed a book about a game warden outdoors, hunting and fishing would not have appeal to women, and they were wrong.
How about demographics of where people live? Is it primarily, are your books more popular in the Intermountain West, across the country, across the world? What have you learned about that?
I think per capita, they're more popular in the Mountain West, but we don't have a lot of people. Mm-hmm. But they do well everywhere, luckily, and I think for different reasons. But I do remember a few years ago, publishers were looking at numbers, and they called and they said, "How many people live in Wyoming?" And I said, 600,000. And they said, "My God, they're all buying the books." So that's great, but it's everywhere, and like I said, for different reasons. I think for a lot of readers, it's a very exotic location.
Wyoming's exotic.
Yes, and the lifestyle is different. I mean, I always hear from international readers, does everybody really have guns out there? That kind of thing. So by giving that snapshot, I hope it tells a lot about what contemporary Wyoming is like.
Walk us through your day. You talked a little bit about writing in your office at your home in Saratoga. In the morning, when you first get up, at different times in the day, how does it work for you?
It has been all over the map. Over the first 10 to 12 years, meaning 10 to 12 books, I was still working full time. My wife and I were running a company in Cheyenne, so I was just basically snatching time whenever I could. I wrote on airplanes, I wrote in hotel rooms, and overseas sometimes. But now that finally things have gotten to the point where that's what I do, it's a lot more regulated. And what I do is I always start with a couple of themes, and I research those by either going to places, talking to experts, and then once I know the subject matter well enough, then I do a bullet point outline from the page 1 to the end. Sometimes those outlines are 40, 50, 60 pages, and then I start writing, and I literally write on top of the outline. Yes, it doesn't mean I won't change or divert or even change the ending when I get there.
And does that happen often? Do you find yourself?
There's always a few things that happen that I didn't anticipate. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the ending changes.
And tell me, is that at 3 a.m. when you wake up, or when you're sitting there writing, or when you drove to Cheyenne for the weekend, or when does that happen?
It can be at any time. Sometimes we'll be watching television at night, and all of a sudden I'll pause it and say, I just have to write this down for tomorrow, kind of thing. But then when I do go to write, it's not early, first super early, but I do write better in the morning, and my goal every day is a minimum of 1,000 words, and sometimes it's 3,000 or 4,000 words. And then I just keep going. A book is about 80,000 words, 90,000 words. So conceivably, I should be able to write a book every 90 days, but I can't.
My gosh, that would be a quick pace. In the past, I think you've said that your goal is a book and a half a year. Is that still what pace you would like, or has it changed a little bit?
It's gotten a little bit slower, simply because the standalone books, the Cassie Duell books, are now going to be a year later than originally planned, simply because the pace of a book and a half a year was getting to be a grind, and I didn't want it to be a grind. I wanted it to be a fun job.
Sure.
So the publisher, a different publisher than the Joe Pickett one, agreed to extend that a little bit.
You hear from readers,
Mm-hmm.
you hear from critics, and I'm sure you get a lot of praise and some criticism. How do you deal with all of that, and how do you grow from that?
It has really changed over the years. First few books, I was living and dying with every review. Luckily, most of them were very positive. I've had very few negative reviews ever. But I know there's authors who read every single Amazon review. I don't anymore. I wait till there's about 20 and I see what the average of stars is, and I've now learned it's going to pretty much stay like that. The new book, Long Range, has over 2,000 reader reviews, and it's stated exactly as it was with 20. So I don't go through every one. There's no book in the world that you can't go on Amazon and find a 1-star review. Moby Dick. This is a horrible fish story. I hated it. Who could really, So you can't get wrapped up in that. I think it's just, there's going to be a lot more opinions on the TV show that I know we've already heard some. Everybody's a critic, but like I said, I wrote the source material and I'm happy with that.
Back to the TV show. Cassie looks a lot different
She does.
on the TV show than how you described her in the book. Is that hard for you, or does that you understand this part of the process?
It's a totally different medium. It's collaborative. I know that all of my lines are not going to be spoken. There's not only screenwriters, but directors and the actors themselves who change things. So I know that going in. All I can hope is that in the aggregate, it's a good show and it drives people to the books. So I'm not going to get in the weeds and say, the casting. I think it'll be interesting.
Do you think you're getting better as a writer?
I do, simply because I've been doing it now for 21 years. And so much of it is, in my mind, 95% of it is a craft. And I think I've gotten better at my craft. And then some of it's just intuitive, where I know now, which I didn't know when I started, by page 50, these things should have happened. By page 100, these things should have happened. Every character should have been introduced. Those kind of things that start to come naturally after a while.
What's that other 5% then?
That's the part that I don't think anybody can teach in any creative writing class or anything else, and that is really the creative part. People often ask, do you write when you're inspired? And my answer is, if I did, I'd be on book 2. But there is something that's hard to convey or teach, and that is just the creative part of how all the story elements come together. It's not a cut and paste. It's something that's hard to understand.
I think it's a fair statement to say that 2020 has been a different year for all of us.
It has.
How was it different for you? How has it impacted your work? And will we see a virus in a future book that might be talked about?
I think nobody wants to read about this virus.
You might
I
be
don't
right.
want to read. I don't want to write about it either.
Yeah.
My book, the Long Range, the last book that came out March 2nd, and as you know, March 12th, the world shut down.
Yeah.
And I was scheduled to do the book signing at the Laramie County Library on March 12th, so it got canceled. And my publishers were going, we want to cancel it. And I said, no, don't. I'm right here. They did it anyway. So that got cut short, but there's a lot of bright spots, strangely enough. It's nice not to travel. I'm 6 months ahead in writing. I finished the last book 6 months ahead. The sales on it are astronomical because people are reading when they're not doing other things.
You found that the pandemic has increased readership?
All across the board, all the past books, the current book, the present book. Publishers agree, especially ebooks, because people can download them at home.
And
Audible.
And Audible books too.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that. When you started writing your career, those things didn't exist.
That's right.
Does that also impact your writing at all, based on how it might sound or might look on an e-reader or not?
No, it does. I've never listened to one of my books. I know how it ends, so I don't know. But the readers, as good as they are, always give the characters voices and inflections that aren't in my mind, so I don't want to get that messed up. But I know that's the fastest growing part of publishing is audiobooks, because they're so easy to get. And so, when you hear publishers complaining that Americans aren't reading, and it's not the case. There's more books being sold in all of those formats than ever before in history.
It might be people have a little more time.
Yeah, they have more time, and there's more. It's easy, in rural areas, it used to be hard to get a book, even sometimes from the library, because if it's out, you have to wait. But now you can get, Audible and ebooks from the library itself.
Does your family get the first crack at your books?
Absolutely. I have, my first reader is my wife. She gets it first.
Does she get it along the way or when it's done?
Used to be along the way. Now she gets the entire thing. And I take her opinions very seriously and make changes because she's a better editor than I am. And then it goes out to all three of my daughters, and they get it, and they offer notes. And then it goes to my agent, and she offers notes, and I put those all together and give them to the editor.
What did the daughters say when they saw The Highway?
Oh, they were creeped out. But one of the inspirations for The Highway was my youngest daughter, who had just driven over from the University of Wyoming to Cheyenne. I think it was over the Thanksgiving break on I-80. Arrived at our house. I went and looked, checked her car, turned it on, and the check engine light was on.
If you've read the book,
Yeah.
Holy smokes.
And I said, "How long has this been on?" And she said, "Don't worry about it, Dad. It's always on." And I thought of all those truckers, and it was Father's Worst Nightmare, and that's what I wrote.
My wife and I travel to North Dakota often, and we often travel I-94, and I will never travel that highway with the same thoughts again, nor will I when I about pass any trucker on an interstate as well. But are there other genres that you have any thoughts of getting into? I think my wife would wonder if you're ever going to write a romance novel.
Probably not. I wouldn't even know how to start. But I have always been interested in maybe writing a book, a historical Western set in the Mountain Men era. I've always been fascinated with that. I don't know if I'll ever
Trappers
do
and
it.
all.
Yes.
Jim Bridgers and
Right. My publishers aren't keen on the idea. It doesn't sound like a very mass market kind of thing. But maybe someday I'll do that.
Curious how publishers impact what you do. Do you have free reign, or are there notes? Do they kind of make a lane for you that you maybe wanted to go out of and had to come back into?
The only time that has ever happened was when I wrote the first standalone novel, which was called Blue Heaven. Totally not in the Joe Pickett series, set in North Idaho. My publisher wasn't keen on the idea of me doing something totally separate. What happened is another publisher picked it up. And so now I have two publishers, which is very rare and weird.
We've had CJ readers and viewers who have been watching us live streaming tonight.
Good.
Send us questions to us, and we've got a good array of questions. And I'm not sure what they're all going to be about, but let's go through them.
Fire away.
This question is about your storylines and the similar events, and how do you have access to the inside working knowledge of the Wyoming Game and Fish, especially game wardens? What have you really done to learn that world, so to speak?
I've done a lot of ride-alongs with game wardens. And one game warden in particular, Mark Nelson, who's based here in Cheyenne, I would go on ride-alongs with him quite frequently with my long list of questions, which he was happy to answer. And we've now become friends. We fish together and everything too. But for a lot of years, I would actually give him the manuscript when it came to regulations and some of the bureaucracy, and say, did I get this right? And he would point out things that might be...
The little details.
Yeah, little details that maybe only a game warden would know, but I do want the books to be as authentic as possible.
Somebody wants to know about the lady sitting next to you on the plane reading one of your books, and you kind of notice that. How do you react?
Oh yeah, I've had a couple of stories like that. The first time, it was a man actually reading one, and I leaned over and I said, would you like me to sign that for you? Thinking, and he just looked
out of the blue?
Yeah, and he looked at me and he just said no. He had no idea who I was, and it was too embarrassing, so I didn't follow it up.
Oh, you should have.
But later, my wife and I were actually flying to London to a book event there, and there was a guy 2 rows up reading my newest book. And I told her what had happened the first time, so I had to do this differently. Because you don't want to say, do you like that book? Because what if they say no? So I waited till we landed, and I walked up behind him and I said, hey, I see that you're reading my book. And he said, I bought this in Denver. He thought I was accusing him of stealing it. So it hasn't really worked well yet.
Oh, There's going to be a time where it's going to turn out, that it's going to turn out well. Hello from China is this next question.
Wow.
How did you conceive of Nate the Falconer? He's his favorite.
Good, China, my goodness. People always assume that every character in a fictional book is based on somebody real. And in most cases, that's, at least for me, not the case. Nate Romanowski is the exception in that he's based on a friend of mine that I grew up with in Casper. He was a year ahead of me in high school, a falconer, the middle linebacker of the football team. And I used to go falconry hunting with him. He had the birds.
Very neat.
And then he went off to the Air Force Academy and then to Special Forces. He's still around. He might be watching this. And that's where I kind of learned about the special world of falconry and the crazy people who do it.
This person went to a book lovers bash here about 10 years ago and says you told a surprising story about your first agent. Can you reprise that story for tonight's audience, please?
Hopefully I can do it quickly. When I had my first manuscript, the open season, this is pre-internet, pre-email. I found out there was an agent in New York who was interested in books from this area. So I physically sent the manuscript to him, never met him. He accepted it, and then nothing happened. And it went on a year, then 2 years. And when I'd call him, he'd be very brusque in his New York way and say, I can't place this book. It's too different. It's set in a place nobody's heard of. It's not really procedural. Basically quit bothering me. So 3 years went by, nothing. And then finally, my wife convinced me to go to a conference in Denver where you pitch your books. Mm-hmm. And there was an agent there who was sort of interested, and he said, "Do you have an agent?" And I said, "Yes, I do. Nothing's happened lately." And I told him his name, and he just looked at me and said, "You don't know he's dead, do you?" And he'd been dead about 6 months.
Oh, goodness.
So,
you didn't have an
pre-internet, I didn't know. Nobody told me. So this story got around this writers' conference pretty fast. But luckily, that's the writers' conference where my editor found me, and that took off from there.
Well, C.J. Box, your books are wonderful.
Thank you.
I've become a fan.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate that. Don't judge me by the highway.
Oh my goodness, my wife will tell you, I couldn't put it down. I drove through that book in about 3 or 4 days. It's a page turner. But thank you so much for
my pleasure.
A couple things, for taking the time out to support the library and for joining us tonight on Wyoming Chronicle.
Thank you very much. This was fun.
Funding for this program is made possible in part by the Wyoming Humanities Council, helping Wyoming take a closer look at life through the humanities, thinkwhy.org, and by the members of the Wyoming PBS Foundation. Thank you for your support.